The project I put together is not perfect, but it does capture the special things that were done and published from the university during that time.
Excellence at Work is sponsored by Youngstown State University.
You spoke on the Curating COVID panel at the 2021 Society of American Archivists conference.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I guess tell us a little bit about some of the other curators who were there and what you saw there, and then we'll start there.
Yeah, so the Society of American Archivists is the national association for archivists of all kinds. They might be medical archivists, or university archivists, corporate archivists. So I found out about the panel through the medical archivists group that I'm a part of. And so the person who started it was from a hospital archives in, I feel like in Illinois. And so he was in charge of collecting his entire hospital's response to COVID. And some of the other people who joined in to the panel then were we had one person from Canada, from a medical archives at a university in Canada, also the archivist for McDonald's Corporation, and then a business archivist who is, I think that their business is kind of like logistics and planning. So that was very interesting. He had a very worldwide view. They had clients all over the globe that they were, trying to help get through this crisis. And then there were two local historical societies, from Vermont and I think somewhere else in the Northeast. So it was a pretty mixed group of people who decided to do this panel. But I thought it was also very interesting. There was another panel of archivists who had thought about or maybe briefly implemented collecting projects about COVID and then decided not to. That stopped them. And it was a whole nother panel about why, their thought processes and the circumstances that led to them to call a halt to the whole project of collecting it.
Do you remember what some of the reasons were that they stopped?
Yeah, one of them was the emotional turmoil that it was. I mean, some of them were in danger of losing their jobs, or they had lost part of their jobs, or they were being evicted from their apartments. And it was just too much for them to then start a new project with minimal resources. Where none of us were working together face to face. So it was just, it was very difficult to get these kinds of projects off the ground when you're facing those kinds of circumstances in your personal life. And then some of them also thought that it was kind of maybe slightly unethical to ask people to be vulnerable and reflect on this pandemic as it was happening, especially student populations. So the one that I remember, was a university who just said, our students are barely hanging on here. And I don't feel like we need to ask them to do one more thing or to, let us into their thoughts. So they hadn't totally scrapped the whole thing, but it might be something that they could pick up at a later date.
What did you share with the panel when you were there from what you've been doing there at Youngstown State University?
I came at it from an angle that we're a small archives and with limited staff. And I just felt like this was, obviously a very different time in the university's history. And whatever I could do to document it would be worthwhile and appreciated. The project I put together is not perfect, but it does capture the special things that were done and published from the university during that time. So we have a regular records management program that captures things like meeting minutes and, news articles and the Jambar and things like that. So all of those things were being captured already. But all of the emails we would get from the provost and the president and Environmental Health and Safety Office, the new website that was developed, those were kinds of things that I thought were outside of the scope of our records management project, but that would be really beneficial to researchers or anybody who was wondering how campus changed and what it was like and kind of why and how those things happened.
So you had, if I understand correctly, you had, I believe it's called the COVID Experience Collection.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also had YSU's COVID Response. And the
Yes.
former was as you talked about before, it consisted of stories submitted by students, correct?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Were there, I guess, how many stories have you collected thus far? And are there any, without naming names or anything like that, are there any notable stories that stood out to you?
We got very few submissions from that. I think it was, a lot to ask of people to kind of step back and, write something out that about their experience. We did have we partnered with one journalism class, and those students submitted short, a couple paragraphs of their experience. Some of them more insightful than others, but it was a voluntary thing. We were asking them to submit. And then there were a couple of interviews that we had. We particularly wanted to focus on international students, as they couldn't go home. They didn't have the support system that maybe other students might have had. Students living in residence halls or with care responsibilities for maybe older family members or children. And everybody was just so busy, and it was hard. And yeah, we did not get very many. It is still open. The submission form is still out there. It's connected to the MOG Library website. So we're still accepting them. We did get a couple interviews from an international student and one of them was also an athlete. So their experiences were good to have.
As far as the other panelists, it seemed that they were representing much larger organizations. Do you see a particular value in your smaller collection as opposed to some of those larger national organizations, kind of a snapshot of what happened at this university during this time?
I think having an example of how COVID and our response to it played out specifically at, a smaller organization, in the Midwest will be very interesting. And I'm proud of what we've collected. I think it will be useful in the future. And I don't know I guess I thought that everybody would be doing that. And then when I got on the panel and I realized, not everybody is or is capable of doing that or hasn't started things like this. I mean, you can't go back and collect those websites that have already been changed, or, it's really hard sometimes to dig up those emails that you had, from last year, or maybe one that came out that you didn't think was particularly important when it came out. But then a year and a half later, the situation's different. And you look at it and you think, well, that was not what I thought it was going to be.
Right.
So I'm glad that we pulled together what we did. And I think it will be helpful to people looking at that. Yeah.
How did you decide what should be included? And what do you think, if you could look a little bit ahead, what do you think the YSU collection will say to future generations?
So as I was going along, at first you're kind of saving everything, and it takes a long time because you don't know where the important stuff is going to be, But then, as we got used to it and you realized which departments were putting out, the new rules or guidance or the emails, or updating their websites, it got a lot easier. So I knew, which emails I was saving, which social media posts I might need, which websites to save and kind of how often. So it did fall into a very, regular categories of things, so that when I go back and I finally arrange this collection so that people can use it, it'll be, well, here's all the COVID dashboard statistics from every week, here's the emails in chronological order, that were sent out from the provost and from the president. And, here's the town hall recordings. Or the student pulse newsletters that go out. Those are digital only. We hadn't saved those before, but I was really interested to know, what events are they planning for students when we can't come together? That kind of fell into place, within a couple of months. I knew, what I was doing, and I really had it down to like once a week, an hour, and I was done. So I think that the collection, I think that there are things, it'll show that there are things that we started during 2020 that continue today, and it'll be the beginnings of those. It'll say, oh, well, when we do online student events, or, we have this kind of different engagement than we never had before. It started here, with this event that they put on in October 2020 because we couldn't do anything else. New traditions that started, new ways for students and faculty to connect with each other. I think some of those will show through the collection we have. And also, just the ways in which people on campus reached out to help each other too. The guidance that was coming about what we should do and what we shouldn't do, but also the continual references to mental health, and here's how you get help if you need it. I don't remember those being so much talked about before this at all. So I think that those are the kinds of things that you'll pick up on when students 50 years from now look at it. Hopefully it'll be something that's totally normal to them. Well, of course, mental health wellness is part of campus recreation and is a part of, everyday life here on campus. But I don't know if it was to the extent that it is now. So.
Excellence at Work is sponsored by Youngstown State University.